heading south of the Mason-Dixon. This is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is your host, Brian McClanahan, and this is episode 282, covering the week of October 4th through October 8th, 2021. Glad to have you back in the program. Very glad to be here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, like our Gab page, and subscribe to our YouTube page, which is a great resource. The YouTube page is the best thing. We've got all of our podcasts there, our lectures, our 5-minute Abbeville U videos that we've done. It's great stuff, and it's all free of charge. Of course, we no longer have a Facebook presence, so you need to get over to Gab and get on that Gab page. Facebook will not allow us to create anything with Abbeville Institute on it anymore. They have just simply blacklisted the Abbeville Institute. We've looked into it. They just won't let us do it. So we're done with Facebook. We'll have to change that on our main page here. But that is no longer going to be anywhere that we can do. So follow us on Twitter and, of course, like that Gab page. Also, go to abbevilleinstitute.org. Click on that support tab at the top of the page, or click on the donate tab. If you want to help us out, it's under donate, I should say, not support, but just click on the donate tab, or there's a big thing that says donate right at the top of the page. Help us explore what's true and valuable in the Southern tradition. I know a lot of organizations ask for your money. I know it. I know they do. And this is my appeal to you. We've got a lot of people out there facing hard times, particularly on our side, because we are being abused by big tech and being called all kinds of names, and it's tough. And so your dollars are stretched thin. We've got inflation skyrocketing. We've got all kinds of things. But if you have if the Southern tradition is valuable to you, and you've got $5 a month, $5, $5 a month is $60 a year. Is it worth that to you to help keep this podcast going, the website? Even if you don't like all the articles, even if you don't like everything I say, we are the only quote-unquote think tank in existence that is dedicated to exploring what's true and valuable in the Southern tradition, not some left-wing wokist stupidity, right? We're the only one, the only think tank. And we have hundreds of scholars that are associated with the Institute. We do these great webinars, which I know people pay for, right? I mean, you do pay for it. We do that to cover the cost of the webinar, but great webinars. We just had one a couple of weeks ago with Kevin Goodsman. It was fantastic. And, of course, you can go to abbevilleacademy.org, and you can pick up all those webinars for $15. Again, that helps with the administrative costs and all the things we have to do. On the back end of that, we've got some really good stuff, and you can learn a lot from these webinars. We've got scholars out there that really want to talk about these things, and it's fantastic. And this is what the Institute does. We've got books. We've got a new book coming out. I can't really talk about it. We do have Marco Bassani's book, which came out this year. That's a great book, Chaining Down Leviathan. We had him on one of those webinars. Great stuff. You got to get these things. This is how you help us. You get that free ebook for giving us that email address at abbevilleinstitute.org. This ABBEVILLE, abbevilleinstitute.org. Exploring the Southern Tradition, 20 essays in defense of the Southern Tradition. It's an awesome book. Yours free of charge just for signing up. And not just in PDF form, you also get it in your ebook format too. So if you're a Kindle reader or you got ebook, you get it that way too. Free of charge. You get it, right? Great stuff. Okay, so this is what we hope you would do to help us explore the Southern tradition. Or download our free mobile app, right? Get our mobile app free of charge. Go and click on that video and audio tab at the top of the page, because what you get there are lectures from all these past conferences free of charge. All this stuff is free of charge. The podcast, free of charge. So if you help contribute to the Institute, again, $5 a month, $10 a month, whatever you've got, it helps us, and it helps us continue to do these things. If we had everybody that's on our email list simply contribute that amount, boy, we'd be really doing some things. So consider it, right? Consider it. Get on that email list. Get our Daily Dose of Dixie. Give us that email address to get the free ebook, Exploring the Southern Tradition. Get on that. Our Daily Dose of Dixie comes Monday through Friday. It covers the articles we get for the week. Don't unsubscribe because you think it's too much. We just want you to see what we're doing on a regular basis. It's also how we contact you about all of our new programs, anything we've got going on, like the Abbeville U videos or our Douglas Rogers essay competition. If you have an undergraduate in your life, college undergraduate, that needs some cash for college, and they're interested in politics or history, and they like those things, right? Economics. Click on that. Go to abbevilleinstitute.org. In the middle of the page, you'll see Douglas B. Rogers Essay Contest. Click on that and have them submit an essay and get some dough out of it. Maybe you win. It's $2,000 for first place. That's good money. $1,000 for second, $500 for third, but even $500 would help buy a couple of books, right? So this is important for helping our people get money to go to school. And that's why the family of Douglas Rogers wanted us to host this essay contest, because they thought, we need some people, we need our people involved in this. And they weren't getting they were getting a lot of pushback from other organizations about, being too PC and other things. They didn't want that. They wanted to have our people involved in this. So get some cash to go to school. We all need to work within the system right now. We all know the universities are corrupt. They're awful. Particularly your soft sciences, all of your soft sciences, but history as a humanities, which is what I think it is, still is corrupt. Your English departments, all of that stuff, corrupt, right? If you're not taking engineering or something like that, you're probably getting a bunch of garbage. But you know what? Good people with fortitude can sit through those classes, check all the boxes, get the degree, and then go out and make money and be on our side. And that's what we need. Right? We need people dedicated to these things. So the Institute is bigger than just academics. We try to appeal to academics, and we do, but we also try to get the everyday Southerner involved in these things and thinking about these things, because that's how we turn things around. And so in that way, if we look at the first thing that I want to talk about for the week, it's the poem that we published on Friday by Thomas Riley. Great poem, On the Wane, one stanza. The empire Lincoln built is on the wane. Those who know history can see the signs, and even those with ears can hear the whines and bellows of frustration, all in vain. Empires commence in pain and end in pain. The honest harspex no doubt divines this course from the beginning. All the lines are clear, only the colors yet remain. It has turned red at last, what started blue. The loud fanatic quest, thinnest of veils, is still incredibly resorted to, although the eloquence quite clearly ails. Glory is something none can now pursue, as, like the rest of them, this empire fails. I like those last two lines. Glory is something now none can pursue, as now, like the rest of this empire fails. So I like that last line because excellence is no longer to be achieved in America. It is the garbage rising to the top. Equity means everyone drives a Yugo and gets a one-bedroom flat. That's equity, because you're going to go to the lowest common denominator. You're not going to raise everyone to the top. Excellence is different than equity. Excellence is the goal, the quest for greatness. And I think if you look across American history, they all talked about this. What they wanted to do to get it. And we had excellent people in history, and we expected that out of people. We expected people to be excellent. And he has a quote on this too: aggressive abroad and despotic at home. This is what the empire does. It falls apart, because eventually you have to go down to the lowest common. As you accept things, the excellence will wane. And so that is something that we have to understand. Look, Jefferson certainly believed in excellence, and the founding generation and Southerners, particularly those in leadership positions, certainly believed in excellence. They wanted America to be great. They wanted the South to be great. These are things they wanted. They wanted their people around them to be great people, good, virtuous, hardworking, successful people who had political power, who could control their overlords and whatever government it was, state, local, federal, and keep them honest. This was important. So we had a lot of, we had two pieces about that this week, essentially. One is a parody piece, which some people called, terrible, but it's by Boyd Cathy. I got some comments on this. Why this writing? This is awful. Well, it's supposed to be funny, right? It's not supposed to be real. White rice is racist. But you could easily see somebody writing this. You could easily see some think tank of lefties coming up and saying, well, white rice really is racist. I mean, it's not. That's a problem. White rice is racist in America. You could see a group of lefties coming up with something like this. And it wouldn't be far-fetched. And so the article, there was a very famous episode of this where H.L. Mencken wrote a history of bathtubs. And then, of course, it was published all over the place and cited in academic journals. And it was all made up. So the parody piece, I want to read it. Historic white rice racism is endemic to white European culture, researchers say. Boston. A report issued Tuesday, September 28th, labels white rice as an historic and continuing example of white European colonialism and toxic food racism. The report, issued by the Blue Ribbon Task Force on Food Racism and Inequity, in 108 pages reveals in detail both the history and the effects of white rice in Anglo-European culture, how its consumption became a status symbol utilized by white plantation owners, and wealthy classes to emphasize their supremacy and control of society, and the resulting submission of BIPOC, BIPOC peoples, which is people of color, essentially. The report also includes a long chapter on rice cultivation and the historical use of slave labor and oppressed peoples in the process. Dr. Stanwyck Weil, who heads of the International Institute for Food Diversity, Equity, and Inclusiveness, chaired the commission, composed of world-renowned experts in the fields of African American studies, feminism, transgenderism, and transphobic deterrence, ableism, and anti-fat theory. Dr. Gladys Hooker-Schmuck, tenured chair of the Black Liberation and Feminist, Lesbian, and Polyamory Studies program at Baxter University, served as vice chair. So, the stuff that he makes up there, you could see right from there. That was a little more over the top than subtle. You could have used some titles and other things, but you could see these things at a university. You could easily see it, right? Think about our current culture. This stuff is there at a university. It's easy to see this, and it's easy to see somebody coming up with this. After all, milk is racist. White dogs are racist, or certain kinds of dogs are racist. All this is where we're going. If you keep your dogs inside, you're racist. That's because poor people tend to be people of color and they can't keep their dogs inside. All this is where we're going. And so that's why when I started with On the Wane, this is where we are. The civilization of the South, of the West, is on the wane. And the South was always seen as the last bastion of Western civilization in America. It's what Lord Acton essentially said. Look, the South is it. Once the South is gone, the West is gone in America, because they're going to submit to the barbarians. They're going to submit to the same forces that destroyed Europe. And that would be the French Revolutionary Order, which essentially that's what the Northern War effort was. It was the French Revolutionary Order. Now, it wasn't completely done away with. This old order wasn't completely done away with until you got to World War I, which completely destroyed it. And of course, America had a hand in doing that. But the fact is, so was that really an American thing to do? It was a progressive thing to do. It was a Wilsonian thing to do. Wilson, of course, born in the South, but eventually adopted much of the progressivism of New England and the Mid-Atlantic area as he became president of Princeton University. But regardless, in New Jersey. But regardless, we see how this is shifting in America. And this kind of stuff, on the wane, it doesn't matter. We can't really appeal to greatness anymore when you have junk like this. It could be real. It's not, but it could be, because we've seen it with other things. We've seen it with other things. And we've seen the drive for reparations, for example, which we had a piece on Wednesday about reparations. We've seen it. That's another thing. Reparations. Now, Phil Lee, who has written a really great book on Reconstruction, points out continuously that the South has already paid reparations because they paid higher taxes and all kinds of things. So that was reparations. That was designed to integrate former slaves into society. The fact that the North squandered the money, didn't know how to do it, mismanaged it, poorly administered these things, all that stuff, Southerners paid their reparations. It's already been done. It wasn't a direct handout. See, the interesting thing about reparations is essentially by default you're admitting that government programs are a failure. That what people needed was just straight cash. You should just give them the cash. Now, there's no economic thought to this, because on the other hand, you're not going to say, all right, look, we're going to give people cash that somehow oppress in American society. So let's start thinking about all groups that had that problem. All groups. So we're just going to give them cash, but then do you take away social welfare programs? You say, well, these programs are a failure. We're not going to do it anymore. If you're in this group, you don't get these things. You sign, when you take the cash, you sign it away, but nobody's going to say that kind of stuff. So, but Phil Lee has pointed out they've already got reparations. Reparations have already been given. This piece by, of course, Jack Marquardt, one of our resident scholars in Japan, is very good in pointing out that, hey, look, a lot of this stuff, it's a treasury of virtue, because the North really wasn't that interested in the welfare of blacks. They created Jim Crow, which is something that most people don't realize in America. You say Jim Crow, oh, that's a Southern institution. Actually, it's not. The first Jim Crow cars were in Massachusetts and Connecticut. They were using the term. And so the South adopted it in the 1890s, 30 years after the war is over, during a terrible economic depression when blacks were seen as competition, labor competition for whites, and there became a tremendous amount of racial strife. It didn't mean that there wasn't there before. There wasn't racial tension. People talked about it. People talked about it all the time. John Randolph Tucker gave a very famous address on this, and he said, look, I don't know what's going to happen here, but this is a big issue, and we have to wrestle with this, and it has to be done fairly. It has to be done fairly. And people, well-educated people in the South, recognized it could be an issue. It was an issue. They recognized that something had to be done so neither side was abused. They didn't want to see either side abusing this. There are very important people in the South that were against the violence against blacks, and rightly so. Uncalled for violence against people, that degrades your civilization. Just because they're of a race, that degrades your civilization. Lawlessness degrades your civilization. And so there were people that called this out and said lynching was wrong and should stop, and were against it, and called it out for what it was, barbaric. On the other hand, this has now been taken to new levels in America, that because the South is portrayed as, every person walking around the South believed in lynching, right? I mean, this isn't true. Or every person walking around the South thought that, this is what should happen to people. That's not true. They didn't. And we know that lynchings, we forget about the fact that these kind of things took place in other parts of America. One of the most famous images of lynchings in America is from Indiana. I mean, there was a whole lot of Confederates in Indiana, let me tell you. Former Confederates. So, I mean, the complexity of America, and Jack pointing that out in this piece on reparations, which is good. I mean, you certainly have a push for it now. We're gonna get reparations. That's a push. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but there are certainly more people talking about it now. But the Phil Lee position is silent. Nobody would dare say this. Wait a second here. We've already done this. We've already gone that direction. We had it after the war. And why should people who aren't even attached to the institution of slavery in any way anymore at all? I mean, no American alive today was ever a slave. No American alive today was ever a slave owner. So why should anyone now benefit or be burdened by this type of of this type of system that we're talking about, an anti-racism. You got people talking about an Department of Anti-Racism or slavery reparations. Why should anybody that lives nowadays be burdened with anything like that? Well, because it's politically powerful, and it makes sense for them. It gives them power. So we had a couple of really good pieces on these kind of social issues and how that wraps into this discussion of where we are in America today. Excellence is on the wane. We don't push for excellence anymore. It's not something we talk about. Excellence is seen as bad. It's seen as there's no equity in that. It's not an equitable thing. We're not saying excellence is equity because we know it can't be that. There's only so many people that can play professional football. There's only so many people that can play professional baseball. There's only so many people that can be rocket scientists. Because there's only so many people that are good enough to do it. There's only so many people that can do certain things. The goal of society should always be to find these natural talents and capitalize on that for everybody that has these talents. And everybody's got a talent to do something. So capitalize on it. Particularly people that are ambitious and want it. Some people don't really care. That's always the struggle. You find what their talents are, what they're good at, what they can do best, and you capitalize on that. So those two pieces were good. And then we had a couple of other interesting pieces this week. One, of course, is about home. Travis Holt is always good for that. Gives us a little story of Arkansas and family and place. And at the end of the day, this is what the Institute really is all about. The Southern tradition is about place. It's about traditions that have been established over time. And those traditions need to be maintained. Because that's how you save America. It's about the people in these areas. And as we said, I've said it for years on this podcast. This podcast now is 5 years old. We're going on to our 6th year. And I've said it now for 6 years. The South is America. And there's always problems with every tradition. We can look back on the Southern tradition and say, yeah, there's things in that tradition we don't want to emulate today. No one would. We don't want to do that to people. We don't want to treat people this way. We don't want to see people in this abuse or anything. We don't want that anymore. We don't want that. But what's timeless about the Southern tradition? Well, decentralization, family, place, community, non-interventionism in foreign policy, which, of course, there were Southerners that were aggressive. They did these things. We know that. There were imperialists in the South. We know all that. But the tradition itself was much more interested in a limited view, in a Washingtonian view and Jeffersonian view of foreign policy. Peaceful trading partners with all, entangling alliances with none. It was not isolationism. It was anti-interventionism. That's the Southern foreign policy. Sound money. The opposition to fusion of government and finance capital, because that creates problems. Independent people, like Travis Holt is talking about here in Arkansas. Independent people who have a culture and a place and a people over time, and this thing develops. Of course, Christianity, the South being an area that has heavy influence of Christianity over time. That being important. A good Christian people with ethics and morals and values. These are things that are important. And we talk about all this stuff at the Institute. We do it all the time. The symbols that are coming down, the symbols of the South, Robert E. Lee, Confederate flags, all that stuff just represents that. That's what it represents. To the left, it only represents race. So they see the world in only one lens. They have a lens and it's race. Everything is race. The Southerners, that's not true. Southerners don't see it that way. They never really have. Of course, there were times they talked a lot about race. They had to. It was a big issue. And as people make it an issue, you're going to talk about it. But Southerners, the idea that Southerners woke up every day, this is what I think most Northerners believe. Southerners woke up every single day and thought to themselves, the first thing they thought about if they were white was, what am I going to do to black people today? And that wasn't what they thought about at all. This is where people don't even get it, right? They just don't get it. And so you have this piece by Travis Holt that talks about people in place and his kin and all of it. It's just so good to read these little stories. It grounds you. That's what I like about when Travis Holt says, hey, he sends me an email, hey, I got something for you. I'm thinking, great, I've got a good story to read. It's fantastic. I've got a good story to read today. The stories, that's what makes the South. That's what makes a Southern tradition. It's not always good. It's not always rosy. We talked about Flannery O'Connor with Casey Chalk, and he talks about this. Yeah, I mean, you've got that Gothic, and he's going to be writing a good piece for us, a really good one, I think, coming up on another important Southern literary figure. There are, of course, great people in the South. People who want to do the right thing. People want to treat people fairly and honestly, do the right thing. People that don't want to abuse people and treat people unfairly. I think I've talked about this movie here, but it was one of the recommendations Clyde Wilson gave one time, Intruders in the Dust. It's a William Faulkner story, but made into film. And who are the heroes? Well, a grandma and a little boy are trying to help save a man who was going to be lynched in Mississippi for a crime he didn't commit, and they figure it out. Two white people, of course, also with a black Southerner too, but they figure it out. They're the heroes because they wanted the guy and a lawyer who didn't necessarily believe him, but wanted the guy to have a fair shake. Right? People wanted fairness. And you look, it's funny, you go and you look at the street when they show it's filmed, in Mississippi, they look at the street and it's white and black people mingling around each other. It's all there, right? I mean, even though you had segregation, it was all there. People mingled around each other anyways. They were around each other all the time. That's the other side that people don't realize. In the North, because their life is already pretty much segregated because there's only it's dominated 97% white, right? So I mean, this is where they see the world. And then the last piece, of course, is Beau Trawick's Our Marxist Revolution. And it's a long piece discussing the war and what's going on in American society with the war and how the war really is the key. And I remember a colleague of mine said one time, why do we face so much trouble in the United States? Well, from the right, well, because we lost the war, right? I mean, it comes down to that. And when you have people like Alan Gelzo writing a new book about Lee that is highly critical of Lee, he's a traitor from the beginning. Monuments represent dissidents. When you have this stuff and you're in that position, that losing position, Americans recognize that just because you lost didn't mean you weren't an American. They recognized that for over 100 years. And now that's no longer the case. If you talk about, say, hey, look, Southerners were people too. Southerners were Americans too, and they were fighting for an America. They were fighting for principles, the Anglo-American tradition, things they believed in. And the war wasn't about slavery. We know that. The war was about saving the Union. This is what it was all about. It was never about anything else for the North. Lincoln himself made that crystal clear. This is what it was all about. You have to create this dichotomy where you say, well, if one side is fighting for slavery, the other side is fighting against slavery. We know that wasn't the case. Now, there were those who would say that's not logical. One side could be fighting for slavery. The other side could be fighting for something else, save the Union. But not in the mind of the average American. One side's fighting for slavery, the other side's fighting against slavery. But that's not the case. That's not the case at all. And then, of course, you have the people that say, well, the simplest explanation is the right explanation. It's Southerners said it's all about slavery. It's all about slavery. What about Stevens' Cornerstone speech? Well, Stevens was one guy. Yeah, I mean, he said it. He talked about slavery. He said, slavery is, or this belief in the inferiority of blacks is one of the cornerstones of the Confederate government. In fact, he listed, he didn't say one of the cornerstones, but the cornerstone speech itself had several things he talked about the advantages of the Confederacy over the United States before he even got to the issue of race and slavery. He says, last but certainly not least is this issue of slavery and what we would call white supremacy or race-based institution. That's what he ended with, but he talked about other things before that. And then later on in life said, well, I said these things about slavery, but, it's extemporaneous, and maybe the writer didn't get this all right. So he said it in a private diary, and no reason to lie to himself. Regardless, it's a great piece because I think, again, it just hammers this home. This really is a war, it's a war on history. It's a war on a people. It's a war on a vision of America that is not in lockstep with the progressive left. As Boyd Cathy pointed out, as Jack Marquardt pointed out, as Travis Holt essentially pointed out by talking about people in place. It's not in line with modern American consumer culture. It's just not, and it's not in line with modern one-people groupthink and one-size-fits-all government. It can't work. So, we had a great week. Please consider that donation to the Institute. We're coming up near the end of the year. This is when we do most of our fundraising, so I'll probably start talking about fundraising quite a bit for these remaining weeks. We don't have many left of the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute for 2021. We always go on a break near the end of the year. We take a couple of weeks off usually. We take the week off of Thanksgiving. So we've got some time coming up where we've got a few weeks left here in October and November, about 6 weeks there. And then we got about 8 of these episodes left this year. So if you are interested in keeping everything going that we do, consider that tax-deductible donation. It is much appreciated. Whatever you can send our way, $5, $10, $100, $1,000, whatever you want to send our way to keep all these things going. We got great plans for the new year, and I'll talk about that in a later podcast episode. But until next time, good day.